Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brittany Quickwarner. I'm the President and CEO at the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. You are joining us for our Committed to Community webinar series. We've been hosting these since about mid-March and have had a long list of really incredible guests who have helped us kind of understand what's going on in our community related to the coronavirus. We've talked a lot about issues that businesses have brought questions to us and brought in experts to try and get those questions answered. One of the questions that I know some of our staff are pretty interested in, and we've heard a lot of community members talk about, is the state of our school districts coming this fall in the wake of this pandemic. So we are honored to be joined by Colt Gill, who is the director of the Oregon Department of Education. Many of you will likely recognize Colt, as he was a longtime education leader in our community as superintendent of the Bethel School District. And that's when Colt and I got to know each other, and I've been so impressed by his leadership and his ability to kind of scale up the incredible things he did in Bethel to the state level. So we're excited to be joined by Colt. For those of you who haven't joined us for one of these webinars, just a little housekeeping. If you are on the Zoom account, feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll get those to Colt. We also have a couple of my staff monitoring. We're live on Facebook as well, so we'll have folks viewing from that platform, and we'll transfer questions from the Facebook chat over here. So if you're watching us on Facebook, welcome. Please feel free to leave questions in the comment section, and we'll make sure to get those over to to Colt. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Colton. You know, if you want to kind of just give us a brief overview of sort of how your department has handled this this pandemic and some of the efforts that you guys have, you know, the monumental task of trying to figure out how to prepare our education system for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brittany. I think we could spend a few days talking about just what's happened in the last 3 months. But we really want to focus on what's going to happen in the next couple of months when school restarts in the fall. So I will share, I put a few slides together, just 8, just to kind of walk everybody so we all have the same basic understanding, and then jump into your questions. So I'll try to do these quickly. There, and then Brittany, everybody should be able to see the screen, right? They're showing up for you? Okay. All right. So I will, you know, I just want to share too that educators across Oregon are working really hard to determine the best way to hold school next year. It's a real challenge doing this under COVID-19 and trying to assure that all students and the staff and the families that all of them return to each day are kept safe and healthy, while at the same time providing an equitable and high quality education. That's a huge challenge, and nothing that any of us in this generation have gone through. I think others in other generations have tried to manage school through wars and different worldwide challenges, but this is new for this generation. So we're all trying really hard. So we created some guidance that works around 4 guiding principles. They are the same guiding principles, but enhanced, that we went through this spring with. So one is that we first want to ensure safety and wellness for our students. So that's even the basics: food, shelter, physical wellness. And then we also want to create conditions to support mental, social, and emotional health for both students and staff. We want to cultivate connection and relationship, because we believe that the way education actually happens is in that relationship between the teacher and the student. So we need to reset those, especially after the long absence. We want to center in equity because we know, based on the data here in Oregon, that both geographically, communities were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and racially, they were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So we are trying really hard to apply an equity-informed, anti-racist, anti-oppressive lens to promote a culturally sustaining and revitalizing education system for our students. We also know that we have to innovate to make this happen. School won't look like it did this spring, and it won't look like it did before March 16th when we closed in-person education either. And we're going to be needing to innovate to make that happen. Now, to put this together, we connected with over 8,000 Oregonians through surveys and 3,000 in Zoom meetings that were two-way Zoom meetings where people gave input on specific portions of the guidance. And so that was a lot of input, and it was focused on underserved communities and on educators who serve them. So when we created the guidance, the focus was to create schools that are ready so that it would be a safe place for learners and staff. It means that we're providing pretty clear statewide requirements and recommendations around health, safety, equity, and instruction. But that necessarily in Oregon, the design and the decision-making about how to implement those is really at the local level. And I say that's necessary in Oregon because we have a wide variety of communities and school districts and schools. So we have about a dozen school districts in Oregon that serve over 10,000 students, and we have more than a dozen that serve fewer than 10 students. So what school will look like in those communities looks very different from place to place. Every school will need to create a process and a submission of an operational blueprint to show how it is that they're implementing the state requirements and recommendations to their community. So their community can have an understanding both of what the requirements are and how they are adjusting to those. These blueprints for reentry have 8 parts to them. The first 3 are the longest and most challenging parts to the way we operate schools. And they are all about community health and safety. So they're the public health protocols, the facilities and school operations, how we manage the day with physical distancing and face coverings and those kinds of issues. And then a response to an outbreak. So we need to be ready for outbreaks to happen. If you're following the news at all in Oregon, you know that outbreaks are up significantly in our state over the last few weeks. And so we need to be ready for that in our schools as well. And then the next 5 are related to the everyday work of school, so centered around equity, including instruction, family and community engagement, mental, social, and emotional health, and staffing and personnel issues. Now, these are, again, the regular work of schools, but there's a few things that we need schools to be aware of in terms of the kind of traumas that students may have experienced during their time away, and just restarting after that long of a break. When schools return in the fall, under this blueprint, they'll identify whether they are going to work to serve every student on site every day. And we do have some schools in Lane County that will be doing that. Or whether they will use a hybrid model where they'll have some students on site and then they'll spend part of their time off-site doing online learning. And then the other one is to do comprehensive distance learning, which is a more rigorous version of what happened this spring that guarantees educator-student contact every day, that tracks student progress through learning goals and standards through the year through assessments so that they're ready for the next school year. Again, this idea that there's local flexibility also comes with local responsibility. This will be while we have had a reduction in restrictions, we're no longer in the stay home, save lives model for how we're dealing with COVID-19 in Oregon right now. Although we have seen other states reduce restrictions and then reintroduce them, like Texas this last week. Where we're at in Oregon today is we're trying to slowly reduce those restrictions and see if that we can manage and mitigate the challenges that COVID-19 brings. So we know that we'll be responding to it. We also know that we're going to be living with the virus until there's immunity in some way, whether that's through a vaccine or broad community immunity or some kind of real strong treatment program. The primary tools that we have are physical distancing and hygiene. Every restriction we lift, we know increases an opportunity for this disease to spread.
Yeah.
We also know that we haven't reintroduced people coming together like they will in schools at this level of proximity for this duration of time yet. So there are about 600,000 plus students and educators in Oregon. We haven't brought that many people in that tight of a space together for that long a period of time yet in Oregon. And we're already right now seeing an increase in cases. So we really need to do the best we can to implement under these safety guidelines if we're going to present or prevent large outbreaks in Oregon.
Yeah.
So we asked districts to think about key principles. There are 7 of them for how we protect ourselves from COVID-19 and spread in the community. And whenever any one of these is reduced, and some of them will necessarily be in certain settings, we ask them to increase the others. So an example I frequently give is around a student who goes to see a specialist, like a speech language pathologist. So typically those are 2 students and 1 teacher, or 1 student and 1 teacher, and they are right across the desk from each other. So they've lost physical distancing, and they necessarily need to be close to be able to hear each other and see the movements of the mouth so that they can make the right sounds or create the right language. That's what they're practicing. So when we do that, we ask that we have them increase things like hand hygiene before and after the session for both the educator and the student, and that we put protective equipment in place, like those plastic shields that you see in grocery stores. We can use those in schools as well. Just a couple more pieces of information here. As we rolled out the guidance on June 10th, that was so that our school districts could begin planning while they had some of their staff still available for that. Others are bringing in staff through the summer to continue this planning. But a part of this is communicating with families and the community at large. And the idea here is that for everyone to know that families are an essential part of the planning, that they need to have kind of a deep understanding regarding the preparations so that they both feel secure about it and so that they can have voice in that. Also, that the guidance describes what we know now, but we know that there will be updates, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And that there are opportunities for their input, which I'll also share. For students, we want them to know that we're thinking about how to make sure school is safe for them, that their schools have been given this guidance to open safely this fall, and that the teachers and districts benefit from student ideas, as well as their patients, as we need to move flexibly through this. Now, we have learned over the last 3 months that every time we think we know something about COVID-19, it changes and we need to adjust, right? Yeah. So we know that between now and September, when most schools will start, or in August when others will start, that things will change even more. So we are planning updates. So the next update to our guidance actually comes out tomorrow. And then we'll have another update come out on July 21st and one on August 11th. Where we will continue to be updated both by how the state's mitigation efforts are going, by input that we're receiving in a survey, which I'll put into the chat in a bit. So all of you are welcome to weigh in on what you think we should be considering. And then continued review of equity impacts. So we have an Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion that is working with external partners to review the guidance and name where there are equity impacts and help us overcome those. And so we'll see updates around that. Also, other states are beginning to roll out their plans. And as they have great ideas, we'll think about how to incorporate those into our plan as well. And then there are countries that are well ahead of us and have been implementing their plans with students on site. So we're watching for studies around how that is going. And then finally, the governor on the 7th will hold her first meeting of the Healthy Schools Reopening Council, which has elected officials, educators, healthcare sector and staff, and families and community all on this council, and they will guide future iterations of this guidance as well. So with that, I'll stop the share and make sure we have a lot of time for your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colt. I really appreciate that. One thing that pops into my head, and I just want to verify. So I think a lot of folks, some of the anxiety around, well, just this pandemic in general is just not knowing. Our businesses have dealt with that a lot, not knowing when reopening's happening and then what the guidance was going to be. And, now in a situation where cases are increasing and not knowing if we're going to go back down into a different version of shutdown. And so I'm curious, the timeline you just showed, is there an expected date when individual districts are planning to communicate with their students and parents about what the expectations for that fall will look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the guidance, all the schools are required to have that operational blueprint completed by August 15th.
Okay.
Completed means that it is shared with their community through their website. At least they can have other ways to share it with families as well. And that's a real key to having families feel secure that that it is a safe place to be, that the district has actually thought about all of the requirements and is showing how they're accomplishing those.
Yeah.
It also means that they have submitted it to their local school board, that they have submitted it to the local public health authority, which in Lane County is Lane County Public Health, and that they have submitted to the Department of Ed, where we will publish all of the state's, the schools and plans from across the state.
Thank you. So assuming that, plans to reopen are approved by the state, the districts submit those, what are you expecting as far as enrollment from maybe individuals who are just not comfortable sending their kids back to school in person if they, maybe they have a family member that's immunocompromised or, some other situation?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question too. I want to pull up something just to make sure I capture all the parts of that.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I did put in the chat for everyone the link to our Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance webpage. So
good.
this has information, including a survey for people who have ideas for us to improve this guidance. That survey information will also be shared with the Governor's Council. So they'll see that as well through this planning process. It also has links to guidance from other states and some other materials that might be helpful as people think about reopening. But your question, okay. So we do know first that we have parents that are in different places. So I get a lot of email every day now. And some of that email says that our guidance is too restrictive, that we need to open our schools in a way that allows children to be children, no face coverings, no physical distancing, let them play. And so clearly there are a group of parents that are ready to have their children back in schools regardless, and want that to look fairly normal for their children. And then I have other families that write to me and they will share that they're in one of the high risk categories. Either their child is or a family member at home is, and they don't believe we should reopen and that we should focus on improving the online learning models that we had this spring and making them more robust so that they serve students in better ways.
Yeah.
That part of the design of the blueprint is so that when schools do choose to reopen to some kind of in-person instruction, whether it's a hybrid model or whether it's all students every day, that they're really showing that community that they're taking steps to try to provide safety for students. In the end, though, some family members will choose to keep their children away from school. We have asked in what will come out tomorrow for districts to first consider a way to have those students be as included as possible in the daily instruction in the classroom by having their online learning be through what's called a 360 camera, where basically the camera acts as the student in the classroom, can track the teacher, and can participate in daily lessons and can even partner when there's group work with other students. That kind of thing. So that would be the first preference. If the district doesn't have that kind of resource or a lot of technology is challenging to get now. I don't know if you all have experienced that as we have in schools, but there's a lot of sold out technologies right now.
Yeah.
Then what we would ask for them to do is provide what's called comprehensive distance learning. Again, that will come out tomorrow as well. And students can also learn from home. But our districts are not really staffed in a way to provide both at the same time a strong at-home learning program and on-site we only have one set of staff, and so they'll need to be trying to do both. And then I think the bottom line on how many students choose that or families choose that will be where we are at with COVID-19 in August. As we get closer and closer to school starting, if Oregon has tampered its current uptick in cases, and we are back down to that 100 or below per day, then I think people will begin to feel safe and ready. But if we continue to increase, that will be a challenge.
Yeah. So along those lines,
You froze on me. I don't know if it's just mine or. So what I'll do while we're waiting for Brittany to re-enter us, I can jump into the chat and try to answer some of these questions. So I see one about athletic competitions and fan support. So right now in Oregon, the schools are following the governor's phased county guidance for sports. This may change over time as we get closer to the fall and we develop more of an understanding around contact in sports and how that impacts the transmission of the disease. But right now we're following that partly because some counties are in different places with COVID-19 outbreaks than others. And scholastic sports has travel and it's interscholastic. And so we need to pay attention for students who may be in one county and what the experiences in a different county could have an impact on them. So if you go to the governor's website, there is sports and recreation guidance posted there for counties in phase 1 and phase 2. And that guidance, along with some overlay guidance from the OSAA, the Oregon School Athletics and Activities Association, provides guidance to schools around how sports will look in the fall. And right now that is limited to mostly non-contact kinds of sports or lesser contact sports. Looks like Heidi's here and
I made it back.
Okay, all right.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm the marketing coordinator. We weren't sure if Brittany was going to be able to make it, so I thought I would jump on. Now she's here. We're all good to go.
Thanks, Heidi.
Back to the bridge then. All right.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. My internet froze up.
That's
and
okay.
I lost all the questions that were in my chat.
I answered a sports question while you were gone. That's it.
Okay, good. If your question hasn't been answered yet, if you can go ahead and retype that into the Zoom chat. My my chat box went away whenever I had to log back in.
I'll just copy and paste all of them in there.
Oh, there we go. So I missed the sports question, but I'm sure I'll get updated on that. We did have a question from Lane Arts Council, which does a lot of really great programming in our schools here locally in Lane County. They were asking, how will outside community partner organizations that come into the schools and provide programming, how will they be kind of treated in this environment? Will it be possible for them to still do that? Or is that something that it'll be taken care of school by school?
Yeah, it is. It is allowable within the guidance to continue to have both in-school and after-school kinds of programming available for kids. And they just need to be able to follow the same health protocols that the school has set up. Okay. And that's true in our public schools, the public charter schools, and in private schools. That's allowable across the board. But it may look a little bit different from school to school, depending on their physical structure and how they are able to check people in and out. And there's screening involved to see if you have symptoms of COVID-19 and things like that, just to help make sure everyone's safe.
What about field trips? Someone asked if field trips are going to be possible next year.
they're not prohibited. I'm trying to, in my mind, look back to that section of our guidance.
Yeah.
It does ask the schools to be thoughtful about field trips, and to think about, a lot of places that field trips would normally be, those aren't open right now either. But there are opportunities, especially for outdoor field trips, where it's possible. The most challenging part of field trips is the transportation. So the transportation guidance, when we're using school buses in particular, is really challenging to maintain physical distancing on the school bus. For example, like what we consider an 84 passenger school bus, when you maintain the full physical distancing, reduces its capacity to less than 15 students.
Oh, wow.
So that's a huge challenge. And so there are other ways to get around that, to use more face masks, to have more hand hygiene, those kinds of things, cleaning of the seats, make sure everybody returns back to the same seat they were in, spreading yourself out when you get on and off the bus there, and getting on and off different exits. So there are different things that they can do, but it just requires a lot more planning.
Yeah. So I guess on that same topic then, will school bus transportation for kids to and from school still be allowed, or are folks going to be expected to get their kiddos there?
No, it will. Yeah, we still will have school bus transportation. Districts may need to look at, especially students who are there not actually required to provide transportation to, the students who are closest to the school, because that tends to be where the buses fill up, so that those times when they're coming in and picking up the last students that are closest to school and before they drop them off. So it may be that more students who are in the outer parts of the attendance area would have more access to the bus than those that are closer to school. Which in Oregon, because the buses are coming to school, a lot of school districts offer transportation to students who are actually already within the walk to school boundary. But they do that because the weather in Oregon is, sometimes challenging, and that's easier for families. But right now, I think it may be more important to ensure health and safety and physical distancing. So.
Yeah. So one of the attendees asked, is the state looking at reorganizing schools around in-class and online for staffing and curriculum delivery? For instance, there are online schools that work really well and which are already kind of established, and could they be helpful in spreading, could they be helpful and help spread the burden of the online schooling?
Yeah. Yes. So Oregon has both school district operated online schools and some virtual public charter schools. And then there may also be some private schools that offer online programming. And so districts are welcome to partner with any of those entities as they develop their plans. The guidance that comes out tomorrow around comprehensive distance learning and what's required is actually quite a bit more robust than what the requirements are for our virtual online charter schools in Oregon. And so they can be a resource. They may not be delivering the same level that we're requiring, and we feel is needed for students to progress through the standards. And I will say that in Oregon, there are outliers for this. We have some high performing online schools, but for the most part, many of the online charter schools in Oregon don't have the best outcomes, frankly.
All right, I moving to a different part of the house office, hoping to have better internet connection here. All right. Technical difficulties.
Yes, I understand.
Just trying to, show what it's like to operate an online universe like these students and teachers might have to do. Someone asked about recess. What will recess look like?
So there's a lot of guidelines around recess, around cleaning of equipment between groups of students, fewer groups of students out at the same time, not having so when students use some of the equipment like balls and things like that, to either ensure that they are maintained with a single cohort of students, so they aren't shared between cohorts. So those are some of the sets of rules around recess. A lot of those are to maintain the public health portions, the cleanliness, that part. But some of it is also to maintain, if there is an outbreak within a cohort, that it doesn't spread outside that cohort into another one.
Okay.
So part of the guidance, and I didn't go over this when I shared earlier, is the more that you can have students interact only with a small group of children, rather than today where they might have, they might travel to a music class and then travel to PE and travel to library, to have more and more of that in the same space where a single educator comes to them and they're not mixing with other students from the school. And that way, if anybody in that cohort does come down with COVID-19, then the contact tracing and testing would be limited to that smaller group rather than the whole school. And if there is an actual outbreak, it may mean that only that classroom or a wing of the school closes and not the entire school. So trying to do what we can to maintain as much education happening day in and day out as possible.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So you touched on, the special committee that you had around equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'd like to just talk a little bit more about that. Someone asked how, distance learning for low income families might be more challenging if they don't have the technology available. How is that being addressed? How is it addressed this spring, as classes went online?
Yeah, so I'd say first, the spring, it was super challenging, and that's what led to some of the guidance that comes out tomorrow. So we did have districts doing some pretty interesting things to try to ensure that students had access. So there were partnerships with businesses, sometimes like Ray's Food Place opened their Wi-Fi out into their parking lots so that families, I think this was one of the things that happened actually in Veneta, so that families who didn't have internet access at home, either because they couldn't afford it or because they lived in an area that was rural enough that it wasn't accessible, could go there, pull into the parking lot and download homework and content from their school in that way. We had districts that were taking school buses into communities with Wi-Fi hotspots and parking so that families could have access in that way. We also had sanitizing and delivery of flash drives for students. So those were the kinds of things that were happening. However, all of that led to a statewide education technology summit that happened about 3 weeks ago now. It was in partnership with the Oregon Department of Education, with the Oregon Community Foundation and other philanthropy partners, and the Oregon Business Council and other business and industry partners, to identify goals in educator technology literacy, to make sure that they could deliver education well remotely, with family and student technology literacy, because a lot of times parents end up becoming tech support. They're handed a new piece of technology. They maybe are even signed up for free Wi-Fi from Comcast for a limited time, but not the kind of support that was needed to make all that work.
Mm-hmm.
And then ensuring that students had devices, whether that's a Chromebook or an iPad or whatever the device is for the district. And then finally, the connectivity, which could be broadband issues in large parts of rural Oregon, or it could be paying the internet provider in cities and suburban areas. So there are a set of specific goals. There are some federal funds that have come to Oregon through the Coronavirus Relief Fund and through the CARES Act. Those funds, we're working with the governor and the legislature to use some of those dollars to attack the connectivity issues, the broadband connectivity issues, and local internet service provider issues for families and for educators who also aren't necessarily working from the school. And then working with those other partners and school districts with a larger part of the CARES Act funds to make sure that students, if a school goes online, that students have access to the devices they need. So there are some efforts underway, and hopefully they will be enough. But frankly, we have a large equity gap or digital divide in Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. Angela asks, most parents work and many cannot afford childcare. So this is kind of along the same equity lines. Schools offer a safe place for those kiddos to be while their parents are working. How has and does the school districts plan to support those parents who might be in that situation? And how does the district balance the effect on families when school is closed with the dangers of the virus?
Yeah. So I think this is and whether students are in childcare or in school, they're clearly interacting with others that the family hasn't been. Mm-hmm. And so when they do that, the increase or the opportunity for them to be impacted by the virus increases. Now, children, for the most part, there are outliers to this, but for the most part, are not significantly impacted when they come down with coronavirus. In fact, sometimes they're not symptomatic at all, mm-hmm. Which makes it even more challenging to know whether they might be impacting others or infecting others. But they clearly all go home and then could infect others in the home, whether they're a family that would have to miss some work time, or whether they're at risk or older family members that may be significantly impacted. So that's a challenge in both of those settings. But the need is real to get the economy going. We kind of need a place for our students to be so that families can go back to work. And so the decisions are local. So in Oregon, there isn't a statewide directive to say all schools must open with all students, or that you must prioritize students of certain ages or who have family members who need to work. So those are all local decisions that you need to work with your local school district around. But there are districts in Oregon who are prioritizing on-site instruction for the youngest students, so elementary students, and using more of their facilities to serve those students on site for families that work. And then the older students who could maintain themselves at home would have more of an online instruction model with less time at school. And so that's one of the models. There are also districts that are partnering with childcare partners and clergy, so churches, to create safe childcare spaces for the time when the students are doing the online portion of their learning. That might not be at home, but maybe it's in a church across the street from the school, and they have a childcare partner. All of those things have costs related to them, and space issues to maintain the same levels of public health. But those are some of the ideas that are being talked about around the state.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions about funding, which I know adds to the complicated nature of this pandemic for sure. Folks are wondering how the budget is looking for the coming school year. It feels like some of these safety precautions are potentially pretty expensive, or at least adding expense to a school district that might not have been budgeting for it. Where's that money coming from? How is the state handling that?
Yeah. What we know based on the May revenue forecast from the state is that revenues are down. So the state gets most of its funding for schools through income tax. And so when people got laid off from work or furloughed or reduced hours, that meant less income tax coming in. And so we will see a reduction in the general fund. The governor announced this weekend after the special session that she is going to call a second special session in the next several weeks to address that, and that she's committed to full state school funding. That's the base level funding for our schools in this coming year, because she feels like now it's needed more than ever. Now, Oregon next year was to implement the Student Success Act that's funded by a corporate activity tax. And of course, a lot of that is down as well. And the revenue forecast showed those tax revenues down quite a bit. The legislature did talk some about that tax in their session just last week. And I imagine if there is another special session, there will be more discussions about whether this is the right timing for that tax. And if it is, what those dollars would be used for. So most of that was to go into implementation on July 1. And I think that most of that, outside of maybe some of the early learning supports that really help even more get the economy going, so that there's a place for our youngest children to be. I think that we'll see kind of a hold until the special session takes place. And we know how the legislature will deal with that tax and with those funds. But that would be the other place we would look to for sort of the extra expenses we're seeing related to technology supports or new professional learning for teachers teaching in this new way, or some of the health and safety equipment that needs to be purchased, like touchless hand sanitizing stations and things like that.
Yeah.
The final place we have to go is that the CARES Act did bring to K-12 schools about $121 million. That is distributed to districts through a formula that was created by the federal government. The districts are all applying for that this week, and they'll begin to receive those distributions, their share of that distribution in later July and in August. So they'll have, and those funds are specifically for coronavirus related activities in schools. So to either reimburse for funds that they already spent, providing meals and things like that over this last 3 months, or to prepare for the next school year.
So along those lines, is the Oregon Department of Education planning to continue some of the grant funding that they do? Someone asked specifically about the Peak 8 grants for physical education.
Yeah, so all of those are potentially impacted. So the vast majority of grants, I think, will be again held until around August 1st to see if, when the legislature comes into session, they'll make some determinations around what continues and what may be reduced. I would put the PE grants, the Peak 8 grants, into that that column or category of grants that will probably hold off until August 1st. There are some particularly related to equity in education in Oregon. So there's the African American Black Student Success Grants. There is one of those in Lane County that will continue to be funded through July and then into the summer, and some related to support for our Latinx students and American Indian students as well. But others, I suspect, will be on hold for a bit until the legislature comes into session.
Wonderful. There's a lot of questions here, so I really appreciate you. I'm kind of firing them at you quickly.
Okay.
So a couple folks asked questions just regarding the actual logistics of classroom space. There were some, messages going around about, are they going to split, classes into cohorts and stagger them as far as days that you're in or days that you're out? How does that information come to be? Is that based on the school district plans that their, individual school districts might recommend those types of things?
Yeah, it will be. So in the current guidance, that is all based at the school level. And like I shared a little bit earlier, some schools will open with all students on site. Those tend to be Oregon's smaller schools where the building is large enough, or they can expand into, the stage and cafeteria and gym and those kind of places, and be able to hold school with the physical distancing necessary. So the guidance through the Oregon Health Authority recommends 35 square feet per person in a room. Most Oregon classrooms are around 900 square feet. So that allows for 24 people to be in that room and maintain that 6-foot social distancing. And that has to be usable space. So they can't count counter space or other things like that. It really needs to be the space to maintain the physical distancing. So under current guidance, it does prevent some schools, again, from having all students every day. And so they would have some kind of cohort model where some students are on site one day, then they're home another day. Again, huge childcare challenges around that. So they'll be looking for ways to try to mitigate that. And then again, I would also watch for the updates to this guidance. So not tomorrow's, but July 21 and August 11. We did just just the 26th of June, so just a couple of days ago, receive new input from the American Association of Pediatrics or Pediatricians. I'm not sure how that is stated. And let's see what it says. So they are really strongly advocating for policy considerations that allow students to be physically present in schools, where we are thinking about mitigating, not eliminating the risk of COVID-19. And so they're even proposing that we think more about 3 feet of physical space rather than 6 feet of physical space. This does mean we'll have more outbreaks in schools across the country for states that follow those recommendations. It's the American Academy of Pediatrics. So if that happens, we will see more outbreaks. Again, most students aren't impacted, but staff are, which could also shut down a school, and families could be if there's an outbreak. So the Oregon Health Authority really needs to consider all the challenges around that kind of guidance, but we may see, a shift as we get closer and closer to school towards groups that are coming out sharing input like that. And I'll put this in the link so folks can read it on their own. We may also, though, see increases in cases like they are in Arizona and Texas and Florida, where we would say it's not time to reopen our schools. Yeah. So we need to continue to watch through the summer. Yeah. So that I just put in a link to that, again, the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics guidance.
Thank you. I have a question about mental health and about learning outcomes. So Jeremy says, schools were faced obviously with an unprecedented event that they had to react to. Learning. Will there be, or are you planning for any type of resources to maybe help the students who aren't up to where they need to be coming into school this fall?
Yes, so I think I'm hearing 2 parts to that question, if I got it right. So we do have complete sections in the guidance that are all about mental and social emotional health, with a number of resources for schools and teachers to consider, especially to think about traumas that have occurred because of the disease. So we have students who are in families where the disease has impacted a family member. We have deaths in Oregon as well. So some of our students have experienced a loved one who's passed away from this illness, or families who have lost work, and that has created stress. We know that since COVID-19 has closed our schools in Oregon, that we also saw a decrease of about 60% a day in the number of child abuse reports. And not all of those reports that DHS gets are validated, but we know that a 60% reduction is pretty significant. And so we know that some students may be experiencing things that otherwise could have been prevented. So all of these social, emotional, and mental health supports are designed to implement culturally responsive trauma-informed practices at school to help students through what's happened over the last 6 months. On the other side, on the lost learning times, so there is always some lost learning during the summer. This is clearly a much longer closure, even though there was, to different degrees in different districts, school available at a distance during the last few months. Some students have lost more ground. And so we have shifted away from some of those summative statewide assessments during this time. And with those dollars invested in shorter term, very quick interim assessments that are just designed to give information to the teacher and student around what kind of learning may be missing. We're not recommending that the first days of school next year be about testing and assessment. However, we really want those to be about relationship building and reconnecting with school. And then after that, quickly assess where the students need support and then look at the standards that we have in place, determine which ones of those are really prerequisites for success in learning at the grade level, the next grade level, and focus in on those and really take an accelerated approach to learning as we start this next school year.
That's wonderful. Thank you. A couple of folks were asking questions around performing arts, and curious what the performing arts plans are for schools in the fall. But then also there was a question that came up around if there is a reduced number of in-person instruction time in schools, is there any kind of state required curriculum that has to be prioritized during that on-site time versus distance learning?
Yeah, so there are required content standards in Oregon, and that's what the priorities where they would land, and they are in the primary areas of English language arts, mathematics, social studies, science, but also in arts, and so they're in PE and health. So those would be the required standards. What we would do is we would reduce to the core content in each of those content areas. So it may not be as rich and broad, but it would tie to, again, what needs to be learned this year to ensure that students are ready for the next year of math. Regarding performing arts, so there are a number of courses, especially at high school, but some of them K-12, like performing arts and PE, frankly, that are another level of challenge to do in a way that keeps everyone safe. So when we had these conversations with the Oregon Health Authority, they recommended much larger distances for choirs and for bands, especially where they had instruments that are horns and things like that project spittle and air that people breathe a much larger distance. Yeah. So they were recommending like up to 12 feet between people. So we're looking at options where some of those can be held outside during good weather days, where they can go into cafeterias or gyms to have performing arts kind of activities. So that's in the guidance as well. And you can see that it just asks them to pay special attention to those kinds of programs, as well as some of our career technical education and some of the science lab kinds of programs where students typically work in groups to really rethink how we're delivering those kinds of activities.
Curious about kindergarten. What will it look like if in-person school does not open in the fall?
Yeah, it's another huge challenge where we do have guidance, and you'll see it again in tomorrow's release in the comprehensive distance learning guidance that goes down as low as kindergarten. And we do have schools in Oregon that currently provide online education to students as young as kindergarten. So it is possible to do that. It requires, frankly, especially at the beginning, a lot more support from the family or the caregiver for the student, if they're with a different caregiver than the parents, to help them get logged in, to get connected, to kind of understand what that whole process is with the teachers. But it is possible to do. It comes in short bursts, so 10 minutes at a time, rather than sitting for 60 minutes like we are in front of a computer. We wouldn't expect kindergartners to do that. It would come with a lot of activities that can be done at home, but will be ready-made and will follow the the state standards. But it will be a tremendous challenge.
Yeah. Do you expect any changes to the length of the school district or the length of the school year into next summer if some of the time in the classroom has to be altered?
Yeah, we are really asking. So Oregon has a required number of instructional hours, and we're really asking districts to try to hold to that, and we'll continue to review that as we go into the school year. But in the guidance, it actually asks districts to consider alternate kinds of calendars. Mm-hmm. So we know that in other states, their school districts are considering these as well, where they actually, in some circumstances, start earlier. So they start mid-August, and then they build in a break that's longer at Thanksgiving time, and a longer winter break, and a longer spring break. And then if the school has a full school outbreak, then they can alter those. So say if they have 3 weeks at winter break instead of our typical 2, then they can reduce that winter break to 1 week and not lose any time, any school instruction time. All schools are welcome to continue to go in deeper into the summer if they need to. That's not uncommon actually in Oregon. And this year there were dozens of school districts that went deeper into June than they typically do. But it is again a district by district decision. This last year, in the coming year, we're trying to do our best. And again, we have to be somewhat flexible if there are statewide outbreaks, but we're trying to get every district to meet those instructional time requirements.
Is there anybody who's exploring like evening or weekend options for families who, you know, maybe have to like shift around schedules to work and, you know, help their kiddos?
Yeah, there are some schools that are thinking about that. The challenge for them is that, again, they don't have any more staff. They hopefully will have the same number of staff that they do currently, but they can't run double shifts. They can, some districts are thinking about split shifts where they're actually having maybe half of their students come the first part of the day. So, you know, like an 8 to 1 or something like that. And then a second shift that is a 3 to into the evening, 8 p.m. or something like that. But again, it's district by district, and it's within their resources, and they're trying to come up with creative solutions that work in their communities.
Yeah. You did touch on this briefly, but I want to make sure to ask the question directly. How will special education or those with learning disabilities be affected and kind of taken care of in these plans?
Yeah. So I'll first share that was a real challenge this spring as everybody shifted quickly online, and school districts not necessarily having actual online learning platforms or specialized tools for students with some who are experiencing some kinds of disabilities. So that, and some of our students with disabilities actually have one-on-one assistance with learning or some kind of additional assistance, even if it's not one-on-one. So that has been a real challenge. Coming into the next school year, that all students' individual education programs, IEPs, are expected to be followed, whether that's on-site or whether it has to be delivered online in some districts. And so those additional staff that support them are working through the summer, in many cases in Oregon, to redesign what that education needs to look like and how to deliver that to students who experience disabilities. But the goals that they have are required to be taught even in this setting.
And one last question for you, and then I just appreciate the time that you've taken to meet with us today. If a vaccine is developed in the next 12 to 18 months, do you anticipate that the Department of Education will require students to have that vaccine in order to attend school in person?
Yeah, I think that is likely. I mean, I don't want to pass the buck on this, but I think that's more likely to be a decision of the legislature.
Okay.
So in Oregon right now, you know, vaccines are required, but there are exclusions that families can take to vaccines. In this case, when there's a public health emergency, it may be that the governor or the legislature steps in and does require it. I don't know that, and I haven't heard discussions related to that really at this time.
Yeah.
I think that the everything we hear about a vaccine is that, yeah, maybe there's development that's short term, but by the time testing and readiness is there, that we're probably talking more than 12 months. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really, really appreciate your time, Colt, and I do not envy the number of incredibly difficult decisions that you have had to make and that I know you're going to continue to have to make. We are lucky to have you. I hope that we can stay in touch, and as there are updates, you know, we obviously will stay connected to our local school district, but the information that you can bring from the state perspective is really valuable. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. It is a challenging time. I know families are really impacted, and educators are as well. And we have to remember a lot of our educators are also families, and so they were trying to teach while they had their kids at home, trying to attend school somewhere else. So it's super challenging time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to give a special shout out to all of our chamber sponsors who have helped make this possible, that we've been able to continue the good work of the chamber through this crazy time. You have seen them on the left side of my screen here throughout the presentation. So a huge shout out to those. And then I want to do a plug just for our next Committed to Community webinar, which is going to be on July 8th. We're going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program and businesses who are needing to apply for the relief of those funds, some of the logistics for how they can go about doing that. So please join us on July 8th, and we appreciate all your time. Thank you, Colt. Everybody have a good one.